Imagine a world where European powers could colonize any part of the Americas at will. Sounds chaotic, right? Well, that was the reality in the early 19th century, until the United States stepped in with a bold declaration that would change the course of history. Welcome to our deep dive into the Monroe Doctrine, the policy that turned America into the self-proclaimed policeman of the Western Hemisphere. In this video, we'll explore what the Monroe Doctrine was and why it was created, the geopolitical landscape of the early 19th century that made it necessary, how it shaped foreign policy for centuries, its impact on Latin America and the world, and whether it was a noble defense of freedom or a tool for American imperialism. So, grab your history hats. Let's travel back to 1823 and uncover the story behind one of America's most influential foreign policies, the world in 1823. To understand the Monroe Doctrine, we need to set the stage. The early 19th century was a time of upheaval and transformation. In Europe, the aftermath of the Napoleonic Wars left major powers like Britain, France, and Spain scrambling to rebuild their empires. Meanwhile, in Latin America, a wave of revolutions was sweeping across the continent. Countries like Argentina, Colombia, and Mexico were fighting for independence from European colonial rule. The United States, still a young nation, watched these events closely. Having won its own independence from Britain just a few decades earlier, America sympathized with these revolutionary movements. But there was also a growing fear. What if European powers tried to reclaim their lost colonies, or worse, expand their empires into the Americas? This fear wasn't unfounded. In 1823, rumors swirled that France and Spain were planning to intervene in Latin America to restore colonial rule. At the same time, Russia was expanding its territory along the Pacific Northwest, claiming land as far south as present-day California. The U.S. knew it had to act. But how? Enter President James Monroe and his Secretary of State, John Quincy Adams. The birth of the Monroe Doctrine in December 1823, President Monroe delivered his annual address to Congress. In it, he laid out what would become known as the Monroe Doctrine. The doctrine had two key principles: non-colonization. The Americas were no longer open to European colonization. Any attempt by European powers to establish new colonies in the Western Hemisphere would be seen as a threat to you. Security, non-intervention. European powers should not interfere in the affairs of independent nations in the Americas. In return, the U.S. promised not to meddle in European conflicts. But here's the twist. The Monroe Doctrine wasn't just an American idea. Behind the scenes, Great Britain played a crucial role. The British, who had the world's most powerful navy, wanted to keep European powers out of Latin America to protect their own trade interests. They even proposed a joint declaration with the U.S. However, Secretary of State John Quincy Adams insisted that America go it alone. He believed that aligning with Britain would make the U.S. look like a junior partner rather than an independent power. And so, the Monroe Doctrine was born, a bold statement that declared the Western Hemisphere off-limits to European colonization. The real motives behind the doctrine, while the Monroe Doctrine is often portrayed as a noble defense of freedom, its creation was driven by more than just altruism. Here's what was really going on: British support. Surprisingly, the U.S. had a silent partner in this policy: Great Britain. The British Navy, the most powerful in the world, helped enforce the doctrine by blocking European powers from recolonizing Latin America. Why? Because Britain wanted to maintain access to Latin American markets for trade. American expansion. The doctrine also served U.S. interests. By keeping European powers out, America could expand its own influence in the Western Hemisphere without competition. This aligned with the growing belief in manifest destiny, the idea that the U.S. was destined to expand across the continent. Economic interests. The U.S. was rapidly industrializing and needed new markets for its goods. By preventing European powers from recolonizing Latin America, the Monroe Doctrine ensured that the U.S. could dominate trade in the region. So, was the Monroe Doctrine a shield for freedom or a sword for American ambition? The answer might be a bit of both. Impact on Latin America. While the Monroe Doctrine protected Latin America from European colonization, it didn't exactly bring peace and prosperity to the region. In fact, it often justified intervention in Latin American affairs. For example, in the Mexican-American War, 1846 to 1848, The U used the doctrine to justify annexing Texas and other territories. In the Spanish-American War, 1898, the U intervened in Cuba, Puerto Rico, and the Philippines, claiming to liberate them from Spanish rule, but ended up controlling them instead. Throughout the 20th century, the U used the doctrine to justify interventions in countries like Cuba, Nicaragua, and Chile, often supporting authoritarian regimes to counter communism. For many Latin Americans, the Monroe Doctrine became a symbol of Yankee imperialism, a policy that protected U.S. interests at the expense of their sovereignty. But it wasn't all negative. The doctrine did help prevent European powers from recolonizing Latin America, allowing newly independent nations to develop on their own terms, at least until the U.S. stepped in. The doctrine's legacy, the Monroe Doctrine, didn't just shape the 19th century, it influenced U.S. foreign policy for over 200 years. During the Cold War, it was used to justify interventions in Latin America to counter Soviet influence, like the Bay of Pigs invasion in Cuba and support for anti-communist regimes. Even today, the doctrine's legacy is debated. Some see it as a cornerstone of American leadership, while others view it as a tool of domination. In 2013, then Secretary of State John Kerry declared that the era of the Monroe Doctrine was over. But has it really been left in the past? As the U.S. continues to navigate its role in the Western Hemisphere, the Monroe Doctrine remains a powerful reminder of the complexities of power, freedom, and influence. So, was the Monroe Doctrine a force for good or a tool for American dominance? The answer isn't black and white. It protected the Americas from European colonization but also paved the way for U.S. interventionism. It shaped the Western Hemisphere but left a complicated legacy for Latin America. What do you think? Was the Monroe Doctrine a necessary defense of freedom or a step toward American imperialism? Let us know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon for more deep dives into history. Thanks for watching, and until next time, keep exploring the past to understand the present.